Welcome to the Stoic Tide. What if I told you that the most powerful response to disrespect isn't loud? It isn't dramatic. It isn't a grand speech that leaves the room silent. No, it's silence itself. Epictetus, the great Stoic philosopher, once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But here's what they don't teach you: how to not react, how to disappear, detach, and let your absence become the most piercing response of all. Because when someone disrespects you, your instincts scream for retaliation. You want to defend yourself, prove a point, maybe even humiliate them just enough so they never dare again. But Stoicism teaches us something deeper. The ultimate power lies not in what you say, but in what you silently remove. Your energy, your presence, your emotional availability. This video isn't about turning the other cheek in some passive, naive way. It's about mastering the kind of silence that shakes their soul, the kind that forces them to sit in their own shadow. In the words of Epictetus, "No man is free who is not master of himself." So if you've ever been disrespected, overlooked, underestimated, this is for you. We're about to break down 5 silent moves that will make them regret ever crossing you without you ever raising your voice. If this message already resonates, take a second to like this video. Subscribe for more Stoic wisdom. Comment your favorite silent power move and share this with someone who needs it. Because real power doesn't need permission, it only needs presence. And today, you're going to reclaim yours. Silent move 1. Withdraw access without explanation. There's a moment, a quiet one, when you realize the most powerful thing you can do isn't raise your voice or explain yourself one more time. It's to stop showing up. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because you've finally understood something most people never will. Your energy is not a public service. When someone repeatedly disrespects you, they're not just crossing a boundary. They're depending on your silence to keep doing it. They assume you'll stay, that your kindness, your patience, your emotional labor will always be there waiting for them. They bank on your consistency because it benefits their chaos. And that's exactly why withdrawal, complete, silent, unannounced, is so powerful. Epictetus, the Stoic master of inner freedom, believed that true strength is found not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. He taught that we suffer not from the events themselves, but from our judgments about them. So when you pull away, not angrily, not dramatically, but quietly, you shift the emotional dynamic in a way they never expected. You're not being passive. You're not sulking. You're doing what Epictetus called choosing conscious suffering over reactionary chaos. You are removing their access to your presence. And in doing so, you force them to face the one thing they've avoided all along: themselves. Most people live in patterns. They expect certain emotional reactions. They expect arguments, tears, explanations, because those things give them power. But when you disappear from that pattern, you create a silence that becomes psychologically unbearable. Suddenly they have no one to perform for, no one to manipulate, no one to blame. And this, Epictetus would argue, is where their real suffering begins. It's not your confrontation that disturbs them. It's your absence. Because that absence becomes a mirror, one they can no longer escape. A mirror that doesn't shout or judge. It just reflects. And without the noise of your justifications clouding their perception, they're left with nothing but the image of their own behavior staring back at them. Now here's where the Stoic philosophy truly becomes a solution. Instead of retaliating, you're rising. You're not engaging in petty revenge or emotional games. You're protecting your inner peace. You're stepping back because your presence was never meant to be taken for granted. Epictetus reminds us that the key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. When someone fails to meet that standard repeatedly, Stoicism doesn't tell you to fight. It tells you to walk away with clarity, not noise. To remove the emotion and keep the principle. And let's be honest, it's hard, especially when the disrespect comes from someone close, a friend, a sibling, a partner. The desire to fix it, to explain your pain, to get closure. That's all real, but that's also where you learn the difference between ego and wisdom. The ego wants to be understood. Wisdom wants peace. And the Stoics always chose peace even when it hurt. Why? Because that pain of detachment is temporary. The pain of staying somewhere you're not valued, that's corrosive. You may feel like disappearing is weak, that by walking away you're letting them win. But Epictetus would challenge that completely. He'd ask, if someone has harmed you, why add to the injury by remaining entangled? And he'd be right. By staying, you become complicit in your own disrespect. By leaving, you reclaim your sovereignty. Your absence becomes not an act of cruelty, but one of sacred preservation. You are no longer performing emotional labor for people who refuse to grow. And here's the deeper truth most people miss. When you walk away without explanation, they remember you differently. Not as angry, not as broken, but as someone who had the strength to say nothing and still be heard. Over time, your silence will echo louder than any final conversation. Because while they expected you to beg, you vanished. While they assumed you'd come running, you never looked back. And in that haunting silence, the regret begins. Not because you punished them, but because you finally valued yourself more than their approval. Think about that. Think about how many times you've stayed longer than you should have, hoping they'd change, hoping they'd see your worth, hoping your patience would pay off. And now ask yourself, where did that lead you? If you're honest, the answer is exhaustion. But Stoicism offers a better path. It tells you that you owe no one your peace, that the only person who must understand your choices is you, that walking away isn't giving up, it's leveling up. And that's the move. Withdraw access. No speech, no drama, just stillness. Let the silence do the explaining. Because the moment they realize they no longer have access to your time, your mind, your soul, that's when the real consequences begin. It's not revenge. It's evolution. It's not bitterness. It's boundaries. And now that you understand that, we're ready to go deeper. Because what comes after the withdrawal is even more powerful. It's not enough to walk away. You have to rise in private. And that brings us to move 2. Move 2, level up in private. One of the most misunderstood forms of power is growth in silence. In a world obsessed with proving, posting, and performing, choosing to evolve privately isn't just rare, it's threatening. Especially to those who once disrespected you. Because here's the truth most people overlook. The same ones who dismissed you, doubted you, or disrespected you, they were counting on you staying stuck. They needed you predictable. They relied on your wounds to keep you visible, reactive, and emotionally accessible. But what happens when you suddenly stop showing up the way they expect? What happens when your life begins to move without them and you don't say a word? Epictetus taught that everything external status, praise, even disrespect is beyond our control. But what is within our control is our inner life, our choices, and our direction. When you begin to focus on your own psychological space without needing to explain or defend yourself, you enter what Epictetus would call true freedom. It's the beginning of Stoic transformation, the conscious decision to pour into your inner world rather than try to fix the outer one. And make no mistake, this unnerves people. They may pretend not to notice your silence, but they do. They feel it because suddenly you're no longer orbiting around their moods, their needs, their drama. You've stepped into your own gravitational field, and it shakes them in ways they can't name. At first, they'll tell themselves you're just going through a phase, that you'll come back like you always did. But Stoic discipline is not a mood. It's a shift. And when that shift becomes consistent, their certainty begins to unravel. You're not posting about your next move. You're not clapping back. You're simply disappearing from the emotional stage they used to control, and that silence, it grows heavier with time because you're not just withdrawing, you're transforming. Not loudly, not with applause, but deeply, inwardly, consistently. This kind of transformation is what Epictetus meant when he spoke of strength in adversity, to keep your peace when you're expected to perform, to sharpen your mind while others gossip, to walk away from shallow validation in favor of substance. And while they're watching, waiting for a sign of weakness, waiting for your return, you're building, you're reading, you're reflecting, you're investing in your health, your goals, your growth. You're doing the kind of work that doesn't get likes or comments, but that turns silence into a storm. And here's what hits them hardest. They can't place you anymore. The version of you they knew doesn't exist. The old patterns don't apply. You don't argue like you used to. You don't respond to bait. You don't even make eye contact in the same way. Your energy no longer orbits them. It's anchored elsewhere. And that unpredictability, that quiet shift in power is psychologically destabilizing to those who once thrived on your emotional predictability. Epictetus believed that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And this is what freedom looks like. Moving in silence, growing in depth while others are still trying to provoke a reaction that no longer exists. Let's be clear. This isn't about pretending you're unaffected. It's about choosing what to focus on. You're not hiding. You're healing. You're not ignoring them. You've simply redirected your attention. And you didn't do it for revenge. You did it for survival, for clarity, for your future. Because at some point you understood that real success doesn't need witnesses, that the most powerful revenge isn't a comeback speech. It's a quiet life built with intention. Epictetus would say, don't explain your philosophy, embody it, and you are. Every time you grow in silence, you embody restraint, discipline, clarity, everything the Stoics valued. You stop defending your worth and you start becoming undeniable. They'll notice. Not all at once, but in small, unsettling ways. In your posture, your pace, your peace. The way you no longer flinch when they enter the room. The way your smile doesn't need their approval. And over time, they'll begin to realize they lost access to a version of you they never valued. Not because you made a scene, but because you made a decision. And here's where the pain really begins for them. Because the Stoic path doesn't just lead to self-mastery. It forces others to see the void they created. They begin to regret not your silence, but everything they did that led to it. And you're too focused to care. You've tasted peace. You felt what it's like to level up without dragging the past behind you. And now you refuse to go back. That's the beauty of the second move. The more you grow quietly, the less you owe anyone an explanation. And that brings us to the next move. One even more potent. Because it's not just about what you stop giving them, it's about what you stop feeling for them. The next level of Stoic strength is not just silence, but emotional unavailability. And when that sets in, everything changes. Let's talk about it. Move 3, become emotionally unavailable. There comes a point when your silence stops being a pause and becomes a decision. Not a dramatic one, not loud or vindictive, but deliberate. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You no longer respond to provocations. You've stepped out of the emotional ring entirely. And people notice the ones who once pushed your buttons, who expected you to react on cue. They sense the difference, not because you told them, but because your detachment makes their chaos echo louder in the absence of your participation. This is what Epictetus would call emotional sovereignty, the refusal to allow others to dictate your state of mind. Most people live their lives handing out emotional access like free samples, reacting to every opinion, every criticism, every petty jab. But what Stoicism teaches us is that true composure is not about suppression. It's about regulation. It's about seeing the storm and refusing to become it. And in today's world, that's radical. You see, when someone disrespects you, they often expect a script to play out. They expect the raised voice, the defensive text, the long explanation, because that reaction feeds them. It confirms they still have power over you. And when you stop giving them that, when you stay calm, when you vanish emotionally, they start to unravel. Think about this. Emotional unavailability doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means your emotions are no longer accessible to people who haven't earned the right to touch them. That's not cruelty. It's discipline. It's a reallocation of energy. You no longer attend every argument you're invited to. You no longer offer explanations to people who never listened in the first place. That detachment becomes a form of psychological protection, but also a tool of transformation. Your lack of reaction forces others to face their behavior without your emotional cushion. And this is where the Stoic philosophy becomes deeply personal. Epictetus reminded his students that we are disturbed not by things, but by the view we take of them. When you become emotionally unavailable, it's not because you've stopped caring about life. It's because you've started caring correctly. You no longer view their approval or validation as necessary to your peace. Their insults don't mean what they used to. Their opinions carry less weight. Why? Because you've shifted from seeking emotional justice to choosing inner justice. And nothing confuses those who mistreated you more than your silence in the face of their noise. This isn't just theory. Take someone like Princess Diana. In the last years of her life, she stopped defending herself publicly. She stopped playing the royal game. She disengaged from the dysfunction and focused on her mission quietly, strategically, with purpose. She didn't seek revenge. She let her dignity speak for her. That emotional unavailability wasn't weakness. It was clarity. It was power. The same tabloid culture that once fed on her vulnerability began to respect her stillness. That's how withdrawal works. Not in the moment, but in the long game. Now ask yourself, how many times have you over-explained, overshared, overreacted to people who never deserved that access to begin with? How much of your energy was spent trying to be understood by people who couldn't even see you clearly? Stoicism offers an antidote. Remove the performance. Choose composure over chaos. The people who once pulled strings in your mind can't do that anymore. Not because you've changed them, but because you've changed what you respond to. This is the evolution they don't expect. They thought you'd stay small. They thought your confidence depended on their opinion. But when you become emotionally unavailable, you send a quiet message. I've outgrown this conversation. And while they gossip, provoke, or spiral, you're focused elsewhere. You're building something deeper, something silent, something rooted. And the more you do, the more their influence fades. Not because you hate them, but because you love your peace more. Epictetus would call this conscious control not over others but over yourself. He taught that the only true freedom is the freedom of the mind. When you stop letting others dictate your emotional state, when you can stay still while the world demands a reaction, you've already won. Not in their eyes because they'll never understand it, but in your own. You don't owe them your anger. You don't owe them your clarity. You owe yourself consistency. That's why this move is so necessary. You don't need to block them, curse them, or announce your detachment. You simply remove your emotional labor from the equation. No one hears the door close, but eventually they feel the cold. And in that silence, your composure becomes the loudest response you've ever given. And once you've mastered that, it's time to take it one step further. Because being emotionally unavailable is powerful, but setting silent boundaries is what cements your transformation. And that's exactly where we're going next. For enforce boundaries silently. There's a quiet kind of power that comes from setting boundaries and never explaining them. Not because you owe no one clarity, but because the people who truly care about you won't require explanations for your self-respect. The ones who push, guilt trip, or question your limits are usually the very ones who benefited from you not having any in the first place. And when you finally draw the line, not with noise or drama but with calm detachment, they begin to notice. Not because you made a grand announcement, but because the access they once had is gone. When someone disrespects you, the first instinct is to explain. You want them to understand how much it hurt. You want them to get it so they'll stop. So they'll see you differently. So they'll change. But that instinct, though natural, is often a trap. It keeps you tethered to the same dynamic that drained you. Epictetus, the Stoic master of detachment and dignity, would argue that your peace doesn't need their permission. It only needs your decision, and that decision is best made in silence. Because true boundaries are not about teaching others. They're about teaching yourself what you will and will not allow. They're about protecting your energy like it matters. Not through confrontation, not through ultimatums, but through what Epictetus called conscious withdrawal from emotional dependence. You don't need to block every number or write a long message. You simply stop engaging in ways that betray your own well-being. You stop replying to messages that always leave you feeling smaller. You stop saying yes to people who never ask how you're doing. You stop participating in dynamics where your presence is only valued when it's convenient for them. And it doesn't happen overnight. At first they won't notice. Your silence will be interpreted as moodiness, as distance, maybe even as passive aggression. But slowly, very slowly, they begin to realize what's really happening. It's not that you're punishing them. You've simply recalibrated your standards, and they're no longer meeting them. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. That's what Epictetus meant when he said, "No person is free who is not master of himself." Setting boundaries in silence might be one of the hardest things you ever do. Not because it's complicated, but because it requires you to resist the urge to defend your peace. It means letting go of the need to be understood by people who have no intention of understanding you. It means choosing discomfort now so you don't have to carry resentment later. It's not about controlling others. It's about controlling how long you expose yourself to disrespect. This is where many people get it wrong. They confuse revenge with healing. They think cutting someone off is about teaching them a lesson. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. It teaches that revenge is emotional debt. It keeps you psychologically tied to the very people who drained you in the first place. You keep replaying the offense. You keep needing them to see your pain. But in doing so, you're still centering them. And Epictetus would urge you to let that go because revenge, even when justified, is a form of bondage. Instead, Stoicism offers a clean, clear alternative. Align your actions with your values and move on. No need for closure, no need for justice, no need for spectacle. Just exit the cycle. And what you'll discover is that life begins to mirror that decision. The people who match your new standard begin to appear. The chaos quiets down. Your inner world grows sharper, more whole. Because the energy you used to spend managing other people's dysfunction is now redirected toward building yourself. Some people will try to come back. They'll notice your absence. They'll wonder what changed. But by then, the gap between who you were and who you've become will be too wide for them to cross. Not because you're unforgiving, but because you finally realize that your peace is sacred. And once you've enforced your boundaries with that kind of stillness and strength, you're ready for the final, most haunting move. Not just disappearing physically, but emotionally. Removing yourself from the cycle completely, not with anger, but with grace. That's what we'll explore next. Because when you disappear with dignity, it becomes the final message, the one they feel long after you've gone. 5. Disappear with dignity. There comes a time when silence isn't just strength, it's survival. When someone continues to disrespect you, test your boundaries, ignore your value, and still expects your loyalty, the wisest thing you can do isn't to retaliate. It's to leave. Not with a grand exit, not with final words, emotional confrontations, or dramatic closure. Just leave quietly, completely, and with dignity. That, Epictetus would say, is the final act of self-respect. Because when you disappear from a situation that continuously dishonors your worth, you're not running away. You're returning to yourself. The people who mistreat you count on your presence. They rely on your predictable tolerance. They expect you to keep explaining, to keep trying, to keep caring. But Stoic wisdom teaches that continuing to show up for those who do not value your effort is not compassion. It's self-neglect. At some point, your silence must become your boundary. Not because you want to punish them, but because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself in order to keep the peace. Disappearing isn't pettiness. It's protection. It's how you reclaim your time, your focus, and your emotional capacity from relationships that only took and never gave. And here's the part most people never expect. Your absence speaks louder than anything you could say. While they expected a reaction, you gave them stillness. While they anticipated an explanation, you offered none. That emptiness, that silence, it forces them to face their own behavior in a way your words never could. They're left sitting in the space where your energy used to be. And in that space, they begin to feel the loss. Not because you yelled, but because you stopped showing up. That absence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. Epictetus taught that we must never base our peace on anything outside of our control, including people, including closure, including understanding. When you leave with dignity, you refuse to beg for resolution. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You let go of the hope that one day they'll see your worth because now you see it for yourself. You don't engage in meaningless conversations anymore. You don't try to fix what you didn't break. You don't explain what should have been self-evident. Instead, you walk away, not to make them regret, but because you no longer tolerate disrespect in any form. This type of disappearance is not avoidance. It's discipline. It's not running. It's choosing. Choosing to end a pattern that's become toxic. Choosing to no longer participate in dynamics that insult your soul. Choosing your peace not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. The Stoics called this self-mastery, the ability to walk away from what doesn't serve your higher self, even if you once cared deeply for it. At first, they might reach out. Maybe not directly, maybe through vague messages, indirect comments, or mutual acquaintances, but by then, you've evolved into someone who doesn't need to look back. You've outgrown the cycle, not out of bitterness, but from clarity. You've built a life where their dysfunction no longer has a role, and that, Epictetus would argue, is the ultimate freedom. Not needing to punish, not needing to explain, simply removing yourself without guilt or noise. Eventually, they'll realize that your presence was never an obligation. It was a gift. And they lost it. Not through a single moment, but through their repeated refusal to honor it. That realization doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in slowly. When they notice your name no longer shows up. When they realize your attention has moved elsewhere. When they feel the cold absence of your emotional investment. That's when it sinks in. Not because you shouted, but because you left and left well. This is the final silent move. And it's the one that completes the cycle of Stoic transformation. You've gone from tolerating to detaching, from reacting to rising, from explaining to enforcing, and now from engaging to exiting. And when you leave with dignity, calm, clear, and unbothered, you close the door in a way that cannot be reopened. You don't leave space for confusion. You leave space for growth. Theirs if they're ready. But most importantly, yours. Your disappearance was never about revenge. It was about rebirth. As Epictetus taught, the greatest freedom is choosing what and who you allow into your peace. When you walk away from what wounds you, you walk toward what heals you. The people who once took your presence for granted will feel your absence in ways words could never deliver. No arguments, no explanations, just stillness and strength. And in that silence, they'll finally understand. They lost something rare. So the next time someone underestimates your value, remember you owe no one access to your soul. Let your silence be the loudest message they ever hear. If this video helped you see your worth more clearly, hit that like button. Subscribe for more Stoic wisdom and share it with someone who's ready to rise quietly, powerfully, and on their own terms. Drop a comment below. My silence is my strength. Because from this point on, you don't need to say a word.